is a founding member of the law firm Carlson, Black, O'Callahan, and Battenberg. He's spent, after having spent 20 years at the corporate and tax department of Michael Best and Frederick, which is one of the largest firms in the state of Wisconsin. Steve has a broad range of tax experience with a special emphasis on nonprofit tax law. He has represented and assisted dozens of nonprofit corporations, both large and small, with obtaining tax exemption, ongoing compliance, and government issues. And I will turn it over to Steve.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I am let me just give you a little bit more background about myself. I am a Wisconsin raised person, lived most of my life in Wisconsin. After college, I decided to join the Peace Corps. And so I spent 2.5 years in a country called Lesotho, which is a country completely surrounded by South Africa. Now, I tell you that for a number of reasons, one of which is it was for those that remember the game show, it may still be on, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? It was the $1 million question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And the question was, which of these countries is completely landlocked by one other country? And the answer was Lesotho. It's completely landlocked by South Africa. So I spent 2.5 years there, came back, went to law school, lived in Seattle for a time, but made my way back to Wisconsin. With the Peace Corps, it does sort of tie into the presentation today, because one of the first projects I had when I got my job at Michael Best was to help the Milwaukee returned Peace Corps volunteers obtain their 501c3 status, obtain their nonprofit status. So that was sort of how it all started. And as was previously mentioned, I spent about 20 years at Michael Best. 3.5 years ago, decided along with 3 other partners to form our own firm in Madison, where I still do a lot of nonprofit tax work, but we also do real estate development and so forth and so on. But I still do a lot of tax work. I am a nonprofit expert. I am not a Zoom expert, so please bear with me if things go a little haywire with the presentation. The other bit of housekeeping I do need to provide is that my light in my office has a timer that if I don't move, it will turn off. So if I go dark and you see me waving wildly, it's just to try to get my light to come back on. I haven't figured out how to get that to work yet. So with that, I am going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? Are those people, Jolene, can you see my screen? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, I can see your screen just like I could before.
Oh yeah, I haven't figured out how to make it a presentation, but you're just going to have to disregard that on your left. That's what's coming. But today's presentation is organizing as a nonprofit, flashy title. What I'd like to do is, as we go forward and I talk about this, I'll give you some tips, maybe some tricks, maybe some stories of things I've seen. I do represent a lot of smaller nonprofit organizations, and I'm assuming that's what most of you are or will be. The rules are the same, but smaller nonprofits have there are issues that they will run into that maybe larger nonprofits wouldn't. So we'll get into that, and I'll give you some stories and maybe some cautionary tales. But let's start with just nonprofit. What does it mean to be when people talk about nonprofits? First of all, there are multiple types of nonprofit organizations. All right. Most people, when they say nonprofit, they mean 501c3 organizations. And 501c3, sort of like a 401k plan or a 403b plan, is just the Internal Revenue Code section in which the nonprofit statute is found. That's why they're 501c3. A lot of people like to say 501(c), 501, but ultimately 501c3 is what most people talk about when they talk about nonprofits. It's not the only type of nonprofit, however. There are other types, up to 25. The ones that you may be familiar with are trade associations. Like if you belong to an industry and there's a trade association, those are 501c6 organizations. Fraternities, sororities, social clubs, those are all quote unquote nonprofit entities. They are not 501c3 entities. All right. But that's okay. We don't really, we don't need to get so much into the terminology. Just know that there are other types of nonprofit organizations other than 501c3. But again, when most people talk about nonprofit, as I'll say tonight, I do mean a charity, a tax exempt organization, a 501c3. Those are all interchangeable. People use them. They kind of mean the same thing. Foundation, sometimes people refer to charities or 501c3 organizations as foundations. That also is the same thing, sort of. All right. And I point that out only because the word foundation has a meaning in the nonprofit world, a special meaning. And there are certain rules that private foundations have that other 501c3 organizations don't have. So think of a private foundation as something like the Helen Bader Foundation, or somebody with a lot of money will set up their own private foundation, the Clinton Foundation. And they're subject to certain rules. And what I found is some small organizations, some nonprofits will form an entity and they'll call it something like, the Foundation for the Parks. And they get concerned that by using the name foundation in their title, they've somehow become subject to all of these special rules. They haven't. It doesn't mean you can call you, if you want to use foundation in your name, that's fine. It doesn't mean you are a foundation in the tax world. I point that out only because I see that a lot. People form an entity, they call themselves foundation, and then they get squirrely and worried that they've done something wrong. You haven't. And as I said before, there are other types of nonprofit entities that are not charities. We're not going to talk about those at all. We're only talking about 501c3 organizations. So before we even talk about what is it, how do we become a 501c3? The first question is, why should we, right? What are the benefits? Why would I want to be a 501c3 or I'm going to say nonprofit? 501c3 gets a little wordy. Why do we want to be a nonprofit? Well, the first is you're exempt from federal and state income taxes, except UBIT. And UBIT stands for Unrelated Business Income Tax. Unrelated Business Income Tax. And what that means is if you're a nonprofit and you're exempt from income taxes, some people would say, well, that's great. I'll form a nonprofit and then I'll run a restaurant, or I'll, own a coffee shop in my nonprofit and I don't have to pay income taxes. Well, nonprofits are for charitable activities. If you're running a business activity unrelated to that charitable activity, you will pay tax on that. That's why it's unrelated business income. It's unrelated to your charitable purposes. Can you have any UBIT as a nonprofit? And the answer is yes, you can. If you pay income tax as a nonprofit, it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. General rule of thumb is if you have more than 33% of your income from these unrelated business activities, you may be in trouble. You may lose your exemption. Probably not an issue with the organizations we're talking about tonight. The two areas that you may find that you have unrelated business income would be if anybody has a journal or anything like that and you accept advertising dollars, that's income to unrelated business income. The other one I've seen, I do a lot of work for youth sports organizations, small organizations. You just think of your community t-ball league, and they have concession stands. In some cases, the revenue that you generate from that concession stand, as silly as it sounds, is subject to income tax. So I caution that just because you're a C3, just because you're a nonprofit, doesn't mean you won't pay income tax, doesn't mean it's awful if you have to, it just means you might. So first is you're exempt from income taxes. The second one, and this is the big one, this is why the C3s, the charitable entities, this is why they're sort of the cream of the crop of nonprofits. And that's because you can accept charitable contributions. So if I want to give $100 to a charity, I can give $100 and take a charitable deduction on my income taxes. If I give $100 to a trade association, we talked about before that, like I said, they're nonprofits, but I can't take a charitable deduction for that. So that's a big reason why people want to form 501c3s, is they can then go out to the community and say, give us your money and you can take a tax deduction for that. I will say a few years ago, this is not a political statement, I'm just telling you what the law changed, and they made it so that the standard deduction, when you do your individual income tax returns, you either take a standard deduction or you itemize your deductions. And if you itemize, that's where you take the charitable deduction. And so they raised the standard deduction amount, so less people were itemizing. And because less people were itemizing, they weren't getting the benefit of a charitable deduction. In other words, I can give money to a charity, I can get a charitable deduction, I can deduct it on my taxes, but I don't care because the standard deduction is already high enough that I'm not going to itemize. This isn't a tax course per se, so you don't really, it's not that important, other than to say a lot of small nonprofits were really, really concerned that was going to hurt their ability to raise revenue. And I haven't seen many studies, but I don't really think it has. I think the deduction, the charitable deduction, is a reason, it's a good kicker for people, but most people will still give money just to do good. Third reason you may want to be a C3, another big one for a lot of you, is that you may be eligible to apply for certain grants. In fact, most grants are only available to tax exempt organizations. So you have to be a C3 in order to get those grants. Those are the three big ones. I put some more down. The fourth one here, the first bullet point on this slide, nonprofits are also exempt from sales taxes. We'll talk more about that later, but if you're a nonprofit, you can buy materials, you can buy things, and you shouldn't have to pay sales tax. So there's a little money there. You may be exempt from property taxes on equipment. Probably not a big one for a lot of you. Most of the small organizations don't own real estate or equipment. Eligible for a raffle license. That's not really that small, because a lot of nonprofits, especially smaller nonprofits, larger nonprofits even, will have raffles. And in Wisconsin, you need to be a C3 in order to get a raffle license. So it's not difficult to apply. It's not difficult to get one, but you have to be a C3, a nonprofit, to get one. I will say, this is a cautionary tale, one of those cautionary tales. Some people say, well, I don't need to be a C3, and I don't need to get my own raffle license because my friend is a member of this other organization and they have a raffle license. So we just run our raffles through their, using their license. You can't do that. You may technically be able to do that, but you're not legally able to do that. So I wouldn't say we don't need our own raffle license because we just use this other organization's. Can't do it. The last one may apply for a bulk mailing permit. That's just what if you get mail, sometimes you'll even see on it nonprofit, postage, not a big selling point for a lot of us. So the big ones would be ability to accept grants, ability to accept charitable contributions, you don't pay income tax, and you get some other kickers like raffle license and sales tax exemptions. So those are the benefits. So now we've decided, yeah, those are some good benefits. Let's do it. What do we do? What are the steps that we take? Well, here they are. This slide sort of goes through what you would do in the order that you would have. The first thing you'd want to do, and we'll talk about these in more detail in a second, but the first thing you're going to want to do is have a meeting. And what I mean by that is you have a group of interested people. You want to do good. You have maybe even operated sort of together as a group for a number of years, a number of months, and you've decided, hey, this is, this thing is going to go for, a while. Let's formalize the process. In which case, the next step would be you would file articles of incorporation. And again, I'll go in more detail and I'll give you links to all of this if anybody wants to go through this process. You file articles of incorporation. That's the articles that you file with the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions to actually become an entity. You then will get an EIN, an employer identification number. Don't be concerned about the word employer. This is just a tax ID number. So don't think, well, we're not going to have any employees, so we don't need this. You do. You need an EIN. You would then form your governance documents, your corporate documents, your bylaws, your conflicts of interest policy. Next step is you file for exemption. And that's on Form 1023. And when I say file for exemption, I mean tax exemption. You file for tax exemption with the IRS. And then you do this charitable solicitation registration. Let's not talk about that right now. So when I talk to people about nonprofits, I like to tell them there's really two steps you take. One is the corporate step. The first step is a corporate step. That is, you form the entity, you get your governance documents. That's a state of Wisconsin thing. You form a corporation in the state of Wisconsin. You get, you have your bylaws, your directors. Now you've got this corporation. Now you've got this thing you've created. You then take this thing, this corporate thing that you've created in Wisconsin, and you take it to the IRS for tax purposes and get exemption. So there's the corporate step. That's the first stuff you do, articles, EIN, bylaws. You then take it to the IRS and get tax exemption. So there's two things, state and then federal tax exemption. There is no special, once you're tax exempt under the IRS, you don't then file for Wisconsin tax exemption, you're just exempt. The other thing I'll say, and there's multiple times I could say this, but oftentimes people will call me after I form nonprofits for them and they'll say, somebody is asking me for my tax ID number. Can we get it? There is no such thing as a tax ID number. Your EIN is not a tax. When I say, I should say a tax exemption number. There is no such thing as a tax exemption number. You don't get a tax exemption number. You get a letter from the IRS. All right. There is no such thing as a tax exemption number. It's what it's called is a letter of determination. More on that upcoming. So let's go over this a little bit more. We can skim through some of this, but I don't want to skip over this part. That's the formation meeting. You have to determine that you have an interested group of volunteers. And as most of you probably know, either from your affiliation with the organizations we're talking to tonight, or just some other organization, if you don't have the power, the people power, then you really can't move forward. You have to make sure we have the volunteers and the commitment to go forward. You do need at least 3 individuals to serve on a board of directors. That's a law. In the state of Wisconsin, you need 3 directors. You can't have 1. You can have more than 3, but you need at least 3. And then you should have the officer positions. Now, here's a cautionary tale that happens sometimes with smaller corporations, smaller nonprofits, especially when you have this formation meeting. Oftentimes what happens is there's a champion, somebody that's championing this organization or this cause, and they'll be out front. They'll be the one that will, interact with me, or they'll be the one that will get all the documents ready. They'll do all of this stuff. They'll, get the exemption. No one owns a nonprofit. Okay. That's the first thing. When you form a nonprofit, again, we'll talk about this in a second, it's not owned by anybody. And so what'll happen sometimes is that person that championed this nonprofit organization and probably sat on the board may have a falling out with the other members, may have a falling out with the other directors. It's not theirs. I had somebody that, was very interested in stray dogs and formed an organization for, helping stray dogs. And I mean, she was really into it, and we formed it. She found 2 other people to serve on the board of directors. And as luck would have it, they had a falling out. They voted her off and got somebody else to join that organization. And she sat there and said, well, wait a second, that's mine. Can they just take it from me? And the answer is, yeah, it isn't yours, right? So the point of that is you need volunteers, especially if you're somebody that's really gung ho about this, but it's not anybody's. You don't own it. So you first have a formation meeting. Now we've decided, yep, we're going to move forward. What's the next step? We file articles of incorporation. You need to use articles of incorporation for a non-stock corporation. You can find the forms. I've put the link right there. And it has to be a non-stock corporation. There are stock corporations. You own shares of stock in a corporation. You are an owner of that corporation. There are non-stock corporations. Nobody owns it. As I said before, nobody owns nonprofits. So in order to become a nonprofit, you first need to be a non-stock corporation. Couple of things you need to have when you do these articles, when you file, you need to have a name. You need to have a registered agent address in Wisconsin. It can be you individually and your home address. And then you need to decide if the organization will have members. And just a few thoughts on that. The first thing I'll tell you is I deal with people that you can ask them the most technical, difficult question in the world, and they'll just, respond. And then you ask them, and what did you want the entity to be called? What did you want the name to be called? It'll take them 2 weeks to decide. It is one of the hardest things for people to figure out is what I should call this. It doesn't matter. You do need to have the word Inc. or corporation in your name. So the name of the entity, registered agent address in Wisconsin, like I said, it can be your home. It can be you. Just know that if you make it your home and you're probably going to receive 20 to 25 credit card offers a day for the rest of your life. So just know that's coming. There are people that when you form these entities, it becomes public record. They search those public records and they'll start sending you stuff. Throw it away. You don't need to buy anything else. People will try to sell you things, say you need this, just throw it away. You don't need anything else. And then the last thing is, will the organization have members? I am partial to not having members in a corporation, in a charity, in a nonprofit. And by that, I don't mean members like the friends or the people that will pay $10 to become members, get a calendar or something like that. I mean, as a legal matter, having members, you need to, in your articles, you need to provide if you're going to have members. I don't like to do that. And the reason I don't is because once you have members and once they have voting rights, it can really complicate things going forward. They have right to vote. If you want to change your name, it can cause issues. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't have members or friends, but I'm partial to not having members as a legal term, members of a non-stock corporation. It's not, I wouldn't say it's typical, but it's not uncommon. I'm just partial to not doing it that way. Caution. If you remember nothing else and you decide to go forward, remember this. Wisconsin has a form articles that you can file to become a non-stock corporation. Remember, I talked about the 2 steps, the corporate stuff, the tax stuff. So you can file articles of incorporation. You can go online, fill them out. You can become a non-stock corporation. The problem is the IRS requires a couple of things to be in your articles. And the draft document on the DFI website, on the state of Wisconsin website, does not have them on there. So if you just use the form and then want to go forward and get tax exemption, you'll need to go back and amend the articles. And the 2 things you need is a purposes clause. Basically, you need to say that we're organized and operated for charitable purposes. It's as simple. It really is as simple as that. That's all you need to say. And then you need a dissolution clause that upon dissolution, if this charity ever dissolves and goes away, the assets of this charity will go to another charity. That needs to be in there. Once assets get into a charity, they don't go out to individuals. They stay in charities, even if they go to another one. All right, step 3. Oh, wait, so the filing fee for the articles is $35. Next step, you obtain employer identification number. You use Form SS4. This is an IRS document. You use Form SS4. I gave you the link where you can find it. The filing fee is $0. You don't pay for it. You just get it. You need an EIN regardless. Even if you're not, like I said, even if you're not going to have employees, you need an EIN. If you're going to have a bank account, that's what you'll use to open it up. A lot of you probably have other businesses where you have EINs or have obtained them, but it's the same process. You then need to form your bylaws. That's the governance document for the organization. A lot of people, I have draft bylaws that if anybody's ever interested, send me an email. I can send you draft bylaws. You shouldn't, this may come as a surprise to some of you, but lawyers don't start on page 1 and start typing. We use documents that we have and we just revise them. So I have template draft bylaws that I use that have most of the stuff in there. You don't file these with the state. They're just internal governance documents that you use to determine things like how the directors are going to be appointed or elected, how officers are appointed or elected, how meetings are called, what sort of vote do we need? In my experience, what happens is people spend a lot of time trying to figure out what to put in their bylaws, and then they just forget about it and they just move forward. So bylaws are one of those things that probably only matter when they matter, and then they really matter. They're used when there are issues that have come up and somebody's saying, well, you can't do that. You didn't call the meeting properly. This is what they would be looking at. Again, they're not filed with the state. I would say, again, you need at least 3 directors. You don't need to put the exact number of directors that your organization is going to have in the bylaws. I like to put a range. So minimum of 3, maximum of 7. Something like that. A couple of ideas. You almost always want to have an odd number. You most always would have it. Well, you need more than 3. 5 is probably a pretty good number. 7 is also fairly common. 9, great if you can get that many people to serve, but that's where it gets a little tricky. The issues with some nonprofit organizations is they can't find people to serve on the board. So in your bylaws, you would put things like the terms. Do you want 3-year terms, 2-year terms? Are there term limits? All of those sorts of concepts go in your bylaws. And I do have a couple of thoughts on that. And there's competing objectives here. One of the objectives would be, we want new blood. We don't want our directors to get stale. We don't want the same 5 people on the board for 30 years. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought is, but if we change our directors all of the time, we're going to lose institutional knowledge, maybe. But the bigger issue is we have to find people all the time. We have to keep finding people. Also, when you're talking about like the number, the term, the number of years that a director would serve, 3 is probably the maximum you would want. 2 is kind of is okay. 1 is too short. 5 is too long. 3 is what I see most often. 2 is also fairly common. And the reason is obvious. I see my neighbor at the cocktail party, at the neighborhood party, and I say, hey, Scott, how would you like to serve on the board of the nonprofit we're starting? And he's like, great. How long are the terms? 7 years. You're going to lose them pretty quickly, right? So you want to make sure that the terms are what people can live with. All right, you've got your articles, your EIN, you've got your bylaws. What else do I need? Well, I need a conflicts of interest policy. In a conflicts of interest policy, the IRS requires this. Again, I have form conflicts of interest policies. The IRS even provides a form conflicts of interest policy. What this is obvious. The board members should not personally profit from the nonprofit. Let me back that up a little bit. It's not that they can't personally profit, they can't over profit, if you will. So let me give you an example. Let's say I have a building and the nonprofit needs a place to lease. Or let's say I own a t-shirt company and the nonprofit decides to have a fun run and they want to make t-shirts. And they come to me, I'm on the board, and they say, hey, will you make the t-shirts? And I say, sure. That's a conflict of interest, but it's allowed. I can still do it as long as I disclose that I have a conflict and I don't take part in the decision, and it's fair. So the conflicts of interest policy doesn't say you can't do these things. It basically says, if these conflicts come up, here is the process you must follow. You need to disclose that you have a conflict. You need to not take part in the decision, and it needs to be approved by the independent directors. And the IRS, like I said, requires that you have a conflicts of interest policy. All right, we've got our organization. We've got everything. We've got our package of corporate documents. We've got our articles. We've got our bylaws. We've got our EIN. We've got our conflicts policy. We've got everything. What do we do now? Well, now we apply for tax exempt status. And you apply for tax exempt status on Form 1023 or 1023 EZ. I love how the IRS puts EZ after these form numbers, as if that somehow makes them easy. It just makes us feel stupid for not knowing how to fill out EZ forms. But in this case, the 1020, as I told you, I went dark there. The 1023 EZ really is easy. The Form 1023 is where you basically, there's one question on the 1023 that's the all important question. And that is, what are your activities? What are you going to do? And you tell the IRS, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're charitable, educational, what have you. And the IRS says, yep, you're good. All right. The 1023 EZ form, you don't even need to do that. You basically self-declare yourself as a nonprofit, as a 501c3. Most friends groups, most small organizations can use the 1023 EZ. And what do I mean by small? If you are not going to generate or receive more than $50,000 in revenue in a year, there's more rules than this. This is the big one. If you're not going to generate more than $50,000 of revenue in a year, you can use 1023 EZ. And again, that is much simpler a process. You file it online. You basically self-declare. You check boxes. Do you affirm that you're operated for charitable purposes? Yes. Do you affirm this? Yes. And then you file it online. The filing fee, as I put there, for the 1023 is $600. For the 1023 EZ is $275. So, there's another benefit to using the EZ form. It's cheaper. And as I said, you receive what's called a determination letter. And it's called that because the IRS determines you to be tax exempt. That is the golden letter. That is, you get that letter, you make copies of that letter, you scan it in, you do whatever you need to do so that when anybody asks, are you a nonprofit? You say yes. And you pull out that letter. That is the evidence. There is no, like I said before, there's no number that you get. It's just a letter. And if you want to get a grant, if large organizations are going to give you money, they'll say, show us proof of your, nonprofit status. That's it. It's this determination letter. So how long does it take? How long does this whole process that I just went through, how long does it take? I can set up a nonprofit in a day. I mean, I can get you all the we can do it in a day. We can get you an entity. We can get you an EIN. Basically, I'm overselling it a little bit, but very, very quickly, I can get you, up and running as a corporation. If you're a 1023 EZ filer, you can file that in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Then how long does it take for the IRS to respond? So it's a day plus 10 minutes. And then 9 months later, you'll get the letter from the IRS. It's that it takes them forever. It takes them longer and longer and longer. Frankly, that's why they created the 1023 EZ process. They were just getting inundated with these, and they just did not have the power to review these. It takes a long time to get it. If you can file the 1023 EZ, you may get it in 2 months, 3 months. If you have to file the 1023, it's going to take a long time. There's nothing you can do about it. The benefit, though, is that when you get the determination letter, it's retroactive to the date of incorporation. And what do I mean by that? It may be obvious, but if I incorporate today and I get my determination letter a year from now, does that mean I have to wait a year to get charitable contributions or apply for grants or to get all these benefits that we talked about? And the answer is no. Most often, it's always retroactive, but most often grants or even people that are giving you money will accept the fact that application means you are a 501c3. Not always, but a lot of times it will. And so because the IRS takes so long, it's kind of an irritation, but it doesn't mean that you have to sit around and you can't do anything as a nonprofit for that time. You are, in fact, and most of the I've never been turned down for 501c3 status. You just know that you're going to get it. And as I said, it's retroactive. How some of you that are thinking and still following along are like, well, then why do we have to apply ever? Why don't we just wait 20 years and apply? And the answer is, you have a time period in which you have to file, and that time period is 27 months. So if you incorporate today, you have 27 months to file, and it's retroactive. If you don't file in that period of time, then it's retroactive to the date of filing. But nobody's going to wait 27 months. It shouldn't take that long. All right. Charitable solicitation registration. You've got your determination letter from the IRS. What do I have to do in the state of Wisconsin? The state of Wisconsin, if you're going to try and solicit for donations, you do need to file a charitable solicitation registration. I say may because some organizations that are going to raise tiny amounts of money, like, maybe it's less than $1,000 in a county, you maybe don't need to register, but I think it's a good idea to register. Wisconsin doesn't require it. This isn't an application to be tax exempt. That is what the IRS determines. This is an application to solicit donations in Wisconsin. And I will tell you, it is the most, this is the one that most people overlook. This is an area of non-compliance. Don't fret if you haven't done it. You can do it now. It's not a killer if you don't, but it is something. You may get a reprimand. They literally send you letters and will reprimand you. It's a formal reprimand, but just something to put in your tickler file to get done. And then the last thing is apply for sales tax exemption. The Wisconsin just changed the law so that all C3 organizations can get sales tax exemption. It's called a certificate of exempt status, a CES number. Now, I've beat you over the head that you don't get a tax exempt number, and now I'm going to tell you you do. You do get a tax exempt number, but this is a sales tax exempt number. So you get a sales tax exempt number, and you go to your Staples and you buy some paper, and they charge you sales tax, and you hand them this, and you won't have to pay the sales tax. So I've given you the link to where you apply. It is easier to obtain following the receipt of the determination letter, because basically if you can show the state of Wisconsin that you have this determination letter, they'll just give you the CES number. But again, I just told you it can take a year to get that. So you can apply before getting the determination letter. And you probably should if it's going to take, if it's going to take that long. All right, so we've now formed our entity. We've done everything. Now what do we do? Well, now we've got some ongoing compliance. This is the stuff that it's all exciting. Yeah, we're a new nonprofit. Yay, we're a charity. This is all fantastic. Now here comes the stuff we have to do every year. One of the things you need to do every year is you need to file a Form 990. Okay. There are 3 990s. There's a 990, a 990 EZ, and a 990N. Most small nonprofits file a 990N. It's a very simple form, basically a postcard, but you do need to file a 990. If you do not file a 990 for 3 consecutive years, all of that trouble you went to get your exemption, you lose. The IRS revokes your exemption if you don't file a 990 for three consecutive years. That it's kind of a hard way of saying it. It means that some people say, well, then I only need to file once every 3 years. I guess technically that might be true. It's only if you don't file for 3 consecutive years that they revoke your exemption, but good idea to file it every year. You will file a corporate annual report. That's not a tax document. That's the document you file to maintain your corporate existence. The registered agent address that we talked about earlier in the presentation, the Department of Financial Institutions will send this annual report postcard to that address. It's a little green card. You get it, you hop online, you renew your annual report, or you file your annual report, and you're in good standing. And then this charitable solicitation, you renew that every year too. We talked about the 990 filing. This is looks a little messy here, but basically if your gross receipts are less than 50,000, you file the 990N. If they're between 50 and 200, you do a 990 EZ. If they're more than 200, you file a 990. Okay. So again, a lot of you are like, whoa, we wish we could get 50,000. If you're less than 50,000, you do a 990N. It's not a 1-year thing. It's a 3-year average. So if one year you get 10,000, then the next year you get 15, and you get 15 most years. And then lo and behold, 1 year, somebody gives you a huge amount of money and you have $75,000 in that year. Does that mean, oh, we now have to file the harder form? The answer is no. A 1-year tick up isn't going to cause you to file up the more complicated form. Just keep filing the 990N. As I say before here, Wisconsin does not require a separate 990 filing. We're all in Wisconsin. I'm assuming. Other states do have separate filings, but Wisconsin does not. You file your 990 with the IRS, and you do not do anything else in Wisconsin. I talked about this earlier. You receive this reminder postcard from WDFI. It's a green postcard. We got one today that was orange. If you get one that's orange, that means you're delinquent. You didn't file it on time. So you get a green one. You hop online, you input some stuff. It's very simple. It takes you like 5 to 10 minutes, and then you're good for the next year. And the charitable solicitation, you renew that annually. And I'll be honest with you, I think they could do a better job of making this process easier. It is complicated. And there's like 4 different forms, but you only have to fill out one of the forms. But it's like you need a flow chart to figure out which form am I supposed to file. So I don't want to scare you, but it's not as simple as the corporate reports. The 990s are simple. This charitable solicitation, I've often found that one's a little bit. They could do a better job of streamlining that process. All right, so we've talked about forming, we've talked about ongoing compliance. What does it mean for individuals to serve on a nonprofit board? What do I need to expect? Well, one thing is a lot of nonprofit boards will have D&O insurance. People refer to it as D&O insurance, directors and officers insurance. That means as an individual, you're not going to get sued individually for things that you've done on behalf, actions you've taken as a director or an officer of the corporation. Does that mean I shouldn't serve on a friends group board if they don't have D&O insurance? Absolutely not. Most small organizations are not going to have D&O insurance. I put it here just because on a lot of larger organizations they will, but I don't think it's necessary. Certainly, if you have it, it's great. But I wouldn't say that's something that is absolutely vital. Other attorneys may disagree with me, though. That's just my opinion. Wisconsin, the statute in Wisconsin does provide liability for volunteers. I've given you the statute reference for those of you that want to look it up later. Chapter 181 says you can't, just because you're a volunteer, you can't get sued in your capacity as a volunteer. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but there's you have some statutory or some legal protection as a volunteer. And the reason is obvious. If people can get sued for being volunteers, I'm not volunteering then. And so it's obvious why that's on the books. What are some other things you should do? These are just some ideas. Thinking about, like what maybe your groups are involved in, or what maybe you might ultimately be involved in. It's a good idea to have a liability waiver for participants of events. I had a friend of mine, they were cleaning up a river. And one of the things they were doing was they were asking for volunteers. And by cleaning up the river, I meant they were literally getting in the river and like chainsawing the logs or the trees that had fallen into the river. And they said, do we need any sort of liability waiver? And I said, yeah, I mean, holding a chainsaw in running water is probably one of those things that, that's like the law school exam of maybe you need a liability waiver for that. So you'd want to develop something that says, you're doing this at your own risk sort of thing. With regard to the bylaws, a lot of people know or have heard of Robert's Rules of Order. And that's a book that Robert, I guess, developed and said, these are the things that, this is how parliamentary procedure needs to go. Do you need to follow Robert's Rules of Order? Some people will say, yes, we do, because we're a corporation. Corporations need to follow Robert's Rules of Order. The answer is no, you do not. You do not. You can agree in your bylaws that we will follow Robert's Rules of Order. I would not do that, but you do not need to follow that. And then the last thing is develop a list of volunteers, form committees. This goes back to the earlier thing I said about, the manpower, the volunteer. That's the lifeblood of small organizations. It's not the money. It's not the donations. I mean, those are great, and that's fantastic. But even the best, the most financially sound organization, if it doesn't have volunteers or people to do the work, it's not going to be successful. So develop a list of volunteers. And in addition to having a board of directors, form committees, have committees, and try to get people to maybe somebody isn't willing to serve 3 years on the board because they think 3 years, that's a lot. Going to all these meetings, I don't want to do that. But if you appoint them to a committee where it's a short period of time, it's a very specific project potentially, and then they see what the organization does, they get a flavor, and then they can get promoted to the board. It's kind of a way to develop your next group of board directors. So those are things to do. We could make that list as long as possible. Here are some things not to do. You cannot participate in political campaigns. That means none, zero. Is that a problem? Not normally. Where I've seen it as an issue before is if you have somebody that's very active in the community and very known for being, let's say, the president of the Friends of the Parks group, very active in the community, and they send a letter to the editor in favor of candidate X. Can they do that? And the answer is, of course they can. There's nothing that prohibits them from doing that. But when they sign their name, they shouldn't put, Steve Battenberg, president of Friends of Parks. You can't do that. Then it looks like you're on behalf of the Friends of Parks engaging in a political campaign. The IRS, this is a zero tolerance. You cannot do it. That being said, that's political campaigns. That's talking about, people trying to get people elected or representing a candidate or favoring a candidate. What about if we have a specific lobbying legislation that we'd like to see passed? Can we do any lobbying on behalf of that? And the answer is a little. You can do some, can't do it all, but you can do a little. So don't do any political campaigning. If you do a little lobbying, that's okay. Try not to do a whole lot of it. But that's allowed. All right, so we've just talked about forming a nonprofit. We've talked about the ongoing compliance, and some of you may be saying, oh my gosh, this is too much. I don't want to have to do all that. I don't want to have to form that entity. I don't want to have to do the ongoing compliance. I just have a project that I want to get funds for. Why do I need to do all that stuff? And the answer is maybe you don't. Maybe you don't. What you can do is you can go out and find an existing 501c3 and say, I want to do X. Can I run my project through you? And the answer is, if they say yes, there is a way to use another nonprofit to do a current project. Why would you want to do why would you want to do this versus forming your own? I like to think of it as if you have one project with a limited time frame, you may want to do a fiscal agent or a fiscal sponsor relationship. If this is an ongoing thing that you're going to do year after year, supporting a park or something like that, you need to form your own nonprofit. You don't want to use a fiscal agent. So I point this out only in case somebody has, sort of a 6-month project. They want to raise funds to do something, and then we're never going to do anything else again. Is there anything other than forming our own nonprofit and having funds through that? And the answer is yes. You go out and you find a current nonprofit with similar objectives to what you want to do, and you ask them to operate as your fiscal sponsor. So we could talk a lot more about that and what that means. But with that, I've been talking for a long time to my computer. With that, I will open it up. Anybody have questions?
Steve, there was a message in the chat.
I am getting the agenda into the chat, so go for it.
Thanks. I almost said a similar thing to Lance. Got a lot going on. Miss the meetings as they seem to be getting more and more important every day, every week. Oh, there's the minutes. Thank you, Colleen. Life is busy and good. Loving this sunny, cold weather.
I'm sorry, are we supposed to ask questions?
Yes. Well, I'm gonna test out the air source heat pump tonight. Last time I had 14, but actually.
There is a question. There is a question I see that.
I have a question.
Sure.
All right. You mentioned about members and membership and whether membership was in your bylaws, and you said not to have members. You said what if you do have members? How do you define that? Does that mean paying members? Does that mean you have to define who is a member in your bylaws? And what are the bad things about doing that a little bit more? And what are legal members? What does that mean? A second question is going to be on your Form 1099. Does that include grant money?
Are you talking about on your Form 990?
990.
Yeah. So the 990, the answer is yes. It does include grant money. So 990, basically, when we talk about these $50,000 limits, what does that mean? What does that include? It includes everything. It includes all revenue, it includes donations, it includes revenue from, unrelated business income. It includes everything. It includes grants as well. With regard to the members, let me be clear about the members. When you make a determination as to whether or not you have members versus non-members is in your articles that you file with the state of Wisconsin. Okay, you can put it in your bylaws, but I want to be clear, that doesn't mean as much. It's in the articles of incorporation. When you file in Wisconsin, you need to tell Wisconsin, do I have members or do I not have members? If you have members, then you have now created a membership organization. And if you now have members of your organization, which you would put you'd put how do you become members? What are the member rights? Do they vote? What do they vote on? That would go in your bylaws, right? So once you have members in your articles of incorporation, you then describe the membership rights in your bylaws. The reason I don't like members in my articles of incorporation is because I think some people, when they hear members, think of members in the practical sense that most of us think about, which is we're a friends group. Of course, we want to have members. We want people to, pay us $25 and become a member of our organization. What I'm saying is that's different, in my opinion. You can have that, right? You can have that $25 person that becomes a member without having to be a membership corporation under Wisconsin law. You could say we're not members. Our organization will not have members. Okay. Now you're no longer in, now we don't care about the membership under the Wisconsin statutes. What are the member rights? But in my bylaws, I can certainly still provide, I like to call them friends, just to avoid the use of the word members. I will have friends. You can provide how much they'll pay to become a friend. They just don't have voting rights. And that I guess is my legal reason for not liking members, is because I think a lot of people will say we want members because they're thinking about it in one respect, but which you can still have the benefit of that without having to make yourself legally a membership corporation. So you may want to have members. You may want to have members with voting rights. You may want the members to appoint the board of directors, in which case, by all means, in your articles, you would say we are a membership corporation. I will just tell you that I attend a lot of meetings. I attend a lot of board of director meetings where members show up and you can't tell who's making the decisions. Is it the members? Is it the board? It's very difficult sometimes to manage that. I'm not trying, I guess I am trying to dissuade people from being membership organizations. My point would be, you can have the benefit of members without being legally a membership corporation. So that I guess would be my. If you don't have voting members, who picks the directors? The directors do. That's called self-perpetuating board. The directors will appoint the next group of directors. And that's almost, I'd say, in 75 to 85% of my nonprofit corporations, you have self-perpetuating boards where the boards will vote and appoint the next group of directors. I'll answer some more of these questions. Can a fiscal agent provide D&O or volunteer liability insurance? I guess they can. They wouldn't provide it though they can provide it to their own directors, but they wouldn't be providing it to the organization. Let me think about that for a second. They certainly, fiscal agent can certainly have D&O insurance, but they can't provide it to the project that they're supporting. That it wouldn't work that way. Some people are having issues with the chat. Can a current 501c3 rename itself to do something somewhat of a different mission, but similar? Interesting question. Can it rename itself? A C3 can easily rename itself. That's a very simple process. You file articles of amendment with the Wisconsin. When I say things are simple, I mean, they're in my world, they're simple. I realize they're not always quite as simple as I make them seem. But if I have a corporation called ABC Corporation and I want it to be XYZ Corporation, what is the process I need to do? I file articles of amendment and change my name. So the articles of incorporation, you picked your name. Now you want to change your name. You file articles of amendment to change your name. Pretty simple. I think it's $10 to do that. But you can't change your name and say, now that we changed our name, we've changed our purposes. It doesn't work that way. You can, this is a very common question. If I formed my corporation to do X and I want to do something else, can I do that something else? I mean, I have this nonprofit. Now, can I use that nonprofit for anything charitable? And the answer is no. No, you told the IRS what you were going to do. The IRS said what you're doing is exempt. So you can't then just say, well, I told you I was going to do cancer research, but now I'm going to use this nonprofit to support a park in Dane County. Can I do that? And the answer is no, you can't do that. You can't change your purposes. If I said I want to do cancer research and I want to do cancer research plus something kind of similar, but a little bit different, yeah, you could do that. It doesn't have, if you're supporting a park and then you decide you want to add something onto your purposes, you can do that. You don't have to go back to the IRS for that, but you can't, by renaming yourself, you can't just automatically change your purposes.
Steve?
Yes.
Yes, I'm the one that asked the question.
Yeah.
So I'll give you more specific
Sure.
for clarity.
Sure.
So in Windsor, we have a local organization. They're called a watershed association, and their purpose is to help the Topin Creek area.
Sure.
And they're kind of running out of steam, and Windsor would like to form a friends group. So the current 501c3 would like to rename itself into a friends group. Their mission would basically be the same. That's why I said it would be similar, but it would have a new name.
Perfectly acceptable.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And a lot of times people will talk about, like buying a nonprofit. And this is, I think it's Bob that was asking me the question. Basically when you buy or sell a nonprofit or, change a nonprofit from one to the, what does that mean? It really means you're just appointing a whole new board. You just have a different group of people. As long as the corporation is doing the same sorts of things, you don't need to go back to the IRS. But yes, you can change your name. Yes, you can appoint a new board. Yes, you can take it over, and your C3 exemption, your determination letter is fine. It's equally as good. You don't need to do anything else. Let's see. Any other questions? People have questions, go ahead. And don't know how to call on people.
Hi, I
Hi.
had my hand up.
Yes.
I'm Katie. I'm not iPad 10. I can't get it changed. Anyway, I have a question about board of directors also being doing a job for the Friends group. So if there was someone on the board that also was overseeing the park and got a stipend for that. What are your thoughts?
I'm not sure I'm following the fact situation. So you're saying somebody serves, say it again.
Okay,
I'm not
I'll
sure.
say it.
Are we talking about two different organizations here or one?
No, okay, I'll tell you. I was a board member on the Friends group.
Okay.
Then they felt that what I was doing was so valuable that they needed to pay me.
Okay.
So they voted me off. Well, I took myself off the board at that time, and I performed this service for them yearly. And now I'd like to get back on the board. And I haven't found anything legally that says I can't.
You're saying, okay, so a couple of things buried within that. One is, you can get back on the board if forget the stipend for a second. I think that's really what you're asking, but just, legally, can you get back on the board if you were a board member and were voted off, or you're no longer, and that would be the bylaws. Are there term limits? What does it say about how often you can be on the board? So you're not going to find anything legally that prohibits you from continuing to serve on a board or being reappointed after you've been off. But if the bylaws will talk, there may be some prohibition on the bylaws. There likely isn't.
There isn't.
Okay. So then the question is, well, I'm getting paid, right? If I'm getting paid from the foundation, can I also serve on the board? And the answer is absolutely yes, you can. right? There is
Okay.
no, I mean, that is a legal answer. Again, the bylaws may say something different and people may say, we don't want that. But that gets back to the conflicts of interest policy. I mean, a lot of executive directors of organizations serve on the board. Now, maybe they don't have a vote, or, I shouldn't say a lot, but it's not uncommon. And the answer is, okay, how much should we pay you? Your stipend is coming up for vote. Well, you say, guys, that's about me. I'm leaving the room and you guys talk about it without me there.
Yep.
If you do that, you're fine. There's no prohibition for you to receive a stipend as a member of the board. Now, you're not getting a stipend as a board member. You're getting one as in another capacity who also happens to be a board member. So yeah, you
Correct.
can do that. Yep.
Correct.
Yep, that's
Thank
fine.
you.
There's other hands up. I don't know if I can do anything, but go ahead and.
Yeah, I have a
Dana.
question. I am curious to learn more about the process with raffles. So getting the permit, is there something that you need to do after the raffle to claim whatever donations were made? And then my other question, similar but different. I have a private business. Is there a way that a private business can host a raffle as a charity for a nonprofit? And how does that work?
That's a good question. The second question is a very good question, because I think the answer is I don't know. And that's always makes it a good question. But let me go in the order that you asked them. So if you have a raffle, you get your raffle license, you have a raffle, what do you have to do after the fact? Is there any disclosures with the state that you need to make? And the answer is no. I don't believe so. I am involved with a couple of organizations that have raffles. It shows up on your 990 though. You need to provide, that goes into your revenue. Right. I mean, the amount of money that you had for a raffle would go on your 990, but I don't believe there's any, and I should know this. I apologize that I don't believe there is any follow up, like you need to provide the state with details on the raffle. I'm almost positive you do not. With regard to your other question is, well, now I own my own business. I'm a landscaping company and I'd like to run a raffle through. I don't think you can do that. That's like borrowing somebody else's raffle license.
Well, not so much run it through, well, maybe it is running it through them. So I did a raffle for a nonprofit in Madison through the business. And through the business, we raised funds, and 100% of the funds we raised for the raffle tickets went to that organization.
Yep. No, I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
And I mean, I hear what you're saying. And this is where, the ogre lawyer says, well, you're not doing it right. You're doing it wrong. You can't do it that way. And I think that's the legal answer, right? I think that's the answer. You can't hold a raffle if you don't have a raffle license. There may be exceptions to that, and maybe you fall within an exception, but let's just talk about as a general rule, you can't hold a raffle. It's no different than, but how is it any different than these bars that hold, I don't know that they're called raffles. They have meat raffles and things like that. I'm going to whisper this to you. Nobody's going to come after you for that.
That's kind of what I figured.
Yeah.
Like,
you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's not great legal advice, but it's good. I think it's good practical advice. They're not, nobody's looking out for you.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody's going to come after you for that. And as I said, I don't do a lot of work with raffles. I don't believe there may be exceptions for like one-time raffles. I just don't think there are, but regardless, it's not something, certainly don't lose sleep over it.
Would like WDFI be the place to find more information
Yes.
about that? Okay.
I think so. Yeah. It used to be that Wisconsin had the Department of Licensing would handle like charitable organizations. And I think that because there was so much non-compliance and things were just all over the place, the DFI said, we're taking it over. So if you go to the website, www.dfi.gov or whatever it is, on the homepage, the right-hand corner it'll say for charities. You click on that and this information is all over there. Wisconsin has great websites for this kind of stuff. So yeah, you go to the WDFI website and click on that charities. tab, and it'll take you to all this information.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure. Somebody asked, can funds for specific goals represented in fundraising be redirected to other general mission or specific goals? I mean, you guys are asking some great questions. That's an excellent question. And the answer is, from a legal perspective, as long as those funds were not restricted, like a donor didn't give you funds and say these can only be used for X, you can use them for anything. That's the legal answer. The practical answer is, if, you know, I'm going to give you the obvious example. If you go out and tell everybody, we're going to use your money for this, and you don't, did you violate the law by using that? You said, we're going to use it for project X, but we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to use it for project Y. Is there any reason why legal reason why you can't do it? The answer is no. Once the money comes into a nonprofit, it can be used for any reason the board sees fit, subject to that restriction issue, which almost certainly doesn't apply. But obviously, if you do that, you may not get donations anymore. So, but yeah, once you get money, you can use it for any purpose. And just as an aside, and a lot of people don't know this, you know, you can give money to your city government and take a charitable deduction for that. I guess it's not charitable deduction, but you can take it similar to giving it to a charity. You can give your money to, you know, not tax money. I mean, you can donate money to your local government, any government, and get a deduction for it. But this question is exactly why people don't and won't do that, is because, okay, I'll give money to my government because they're going to build a dog park, but then they use my money to plug potholes, and there's nothing I can do about that. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, it can be redirected to other things. Any other questions? iPad 10, your hand is still up.
Oh, I didn't take it down.
Miss 10, yes, Miss 10, you have another question.
Yes, I do. Our board, there's several people on our board that do have conflict of interest, and they're always, you know, they remove themselves, you know, if that comes up. The board, there's some people on the board that don't want a board member that has a job. No. What, you know, there's nothing legally that they can do.
Well, but the board can always decide they don't want that. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with a board member getting a stipend for, you know, having a job with the nonprofit. There's nothing legally prohibiting that, as long as you abide by the conflicts of interest policy. But the reverse is also true. There's absolutely nothing wrong. You can't use it. You can use it as a defense. You know, you can play defense and say, well, I can be, you know, I can be employed and be on the board as long as we abide by the conflicts, but you can't use it for offense. You can't say, you can't remove me just because I'm on the, just because I'm getting paid. They most certainly can. If the board decides they don't want people that are receiving funds from the organization to be on the board, is there any reason why someone that's kicked off the board for that reason can say you can't do that? And the answer is no, they can. If that's the decision, they can.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, if there's any other questions, I'm not sure if I can see everybody's, but I've seen, I think I've got all the chats. You have my information. As I said, I check my email often, much to the chagrin of my family. But if anybody has any follow-up questions, or, you know, wants to review the process, I'm happy to talk to you. It's not like I'm not gonna start the timer. It's what I do. I appreciate what you guys do. I appreciate people that work with these small nonprofits. So I'm always happy to help you out. And the things that maybe take you a long time to figure out, I can tell you how to do it in much less time. So feel free to reach out to me. I have absolutely no problem. Okay.